hitting the button, my own producer. That's right. We are live. This is episode 300 of the In the Tank podcast. We're going to be talking about solar power and why it's terrible. And we're going to get to the idea of the United States becoming a nation of renters. That might suit our Isaac Orr very well. But as always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal. And I am joined by editorial director, that's his name or title, Justin Haskins. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing okay, although I have to say, I know this is like the 300th episode, and that's like a big deal to you and whatever, because this whole show is like your life. But has there been an independent audit of the number of episodes? How do I know this is really the 300th episode?
I am very meticulous about these things.
Can we get Trump's lawyer on the show, and can we like set up an independent audit? I want to make sure that this is really episode 300.
Also joining us, back by popular demand from the Isaac Orr fan club, Isaac Orr, research fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. How are you, good sir?
I'm just thrilled there's a fan club. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
You
no
like that?
Club.
Your outpouring of love sustains me.
There's no fan club.
The Isaac Orr fan club. Isn't that like an amazing title for a fan club for you?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Isaac or bust. Yeah.
And also, I've got a surprise for all of those people that have been watching us since episode 1. The return of John Noderf. Oh my God. What's up, John?
I am alive. It is me. Yes. The show instantly got like 100 times better, which low bar. So it went from not good at all to just barely listenable.
That's true.
That's high praise.
But
at least Jim's not on.
Well,
not
we
today.
knew if you were going to be on, he couldn't be on. So that was like your one rule when you were co-host of this podcast with me all those years ago, was to never have Jim on. So yeah, we had to, abide by your wishes.
I would like to be called the founder of the podcast. Thank you. I'm the godfather, if you will, of this podcast. So
not even co-founder. We did this together.
Well, sort of. You would not. None of you would be what you are today without me starting.
Yeah, you're right.
Podcast.
None of
That's
us would
true.
be here. None of us would be here if it weren't for you, John.
We're truly standing on the shoulders of giants.
yeah, or someone who's like 5'8".
Thanks, Isaac. Thanks for giving me. Thanks for giving me the extra half inch. I appreciate that.
John is, he's been busy selling Windex. Actually, now I think it's off-brand Windex. Do you add the blue coloring into it, or?
Yeah, of course. I just mix my own. What's
That's why
what's
he's got that
interesting
Windex
though?
colored shirt.
It's like bootleg Windex.
The funny part is though, we when we started this podcast, we'd often do all these sort of indexes, like rich states, poor states, and like where everyone's moving. And you
Freedom
know what?
Index.
I actually walked the walk. I moved from the 47th state on the rich states, poor states list to the number 11. And Donnie is still stuck in Chicago. So, I mean, at least I'm walking the walk.
That's
so
true.
Does it feel like you've made a drastic improvement?
Yes, you can tell as you drive across country, you become more and more free.
Oh, wow. Jim is listening, apparently, everyone. So
it is palpable, the freedom that you feel leaving Chicago. I'm not even being hyperbolic.
When did you move? Was this post-COVID?
It was a month ago. So I've only been here for a month, but yeah.
Okay, all right.
As a Wisconsinite, I've been telling people that forever. Like, leave Illinois if you can. Flee
Illinois. So this is like I said, the 300th episode. It takes 2 years when you're doing it once a week to reach another century milestone, right? So it's a pretty big occasion. But, we're also a very, very low budget podcast, so we don't really have too much to present to you as the audience for like a spectacular. I had these ideas of having some like video montages, but I don't have time for that. I'm sorry, people. But he wasn't on video. So I want to reward. We were for the last like 120 episodes.
Yeah, but not John.
That's true. I want to reward those constant listeners as much as possible. So I'm going to say that if you want to email us or leave a comment at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com, or you can leave a comment of what your favorite moment was of our entire show throughout the 300 episodes that we have done. What your favorite moment is, whether it's a certain topic that we covered, maybe even a joke by Isaac, or a guest that we interviewed or featured on the show. I will reward 5 people with this beautiful book, Socialism is Evil, authored by our very own Justin Haskins.
That's a great reward, yeah.
And an excellently laid out cover, I might add, laid out by also a very handsome gentleman.
So I actually liked the show better when it was just you and John as the hosts. Let me get to that, because I do have a comment on that.
Isaac also he's made it worse.
Stopping Socialism sticker, so you get that as well if you were one of the 5 chosen people. So send those emails. If you send it to me during the show, I'll read them. I'll check the emails while we're doing this.
Are these signed like by the author? I mean, Justin, are you? John Hancock on these?
We could probably arrange that.
We could arrange it. At the very least, there'll be forged signatures by Donnie.
Justin
I wanted to use the signature to write checks to myself, because I wanted to,
What?
It's a good point.
Take my $0. Yeah,
you're getting all that big oil money. Come on.
Yeah, Justin will sign the inside. I'll sign the front cover because I designed it. So you know where the prominent signature is. Yeah, so to Isaac's point of when the show was just John and I went back somewhat recently and watched episode like 26. Just some random episode that was John and I. And I was like expecting it to be like cringy and terrible because it was so early into the process. And I thought it was actually like really good. I was kind of, I was impressed by us, John. But then Justin and I were talking about the first episode and whether or not the first episode is still hosted on heartland.org, which it is. I found it. I sent it to you, Justin. Did you watch any of it?
I didn't watch it because it's audio.
Did you listen to any of it?
I did listen to it, yes.
I listened to it. I got through about 5 minutes before I turned it off because it was way too cringy.
It was pretty cringy. I listened to it. I listened to it for a good like 20 because I like the cringe. So I found that really good. It was. Well, I mean, look. The thing is, I mean, you guys, when you started this show, you guys weren't podcast people. This was like the beginning of something totally new, and so I mean, you're gonna have a little bit of that awkwardness, I think, at the beginning. And in fairness, I actually think John was significantly better than you, Donald.
I will agree with that. No doubt.
Think you just seemed a little hesitant.
I was definitely reading like a script. It was awful. It was awful.
Yeah, it was rough.
Well, we had a formula. I mean, we had a very specific formula. We tried to, go from and tweak. Actually, so my question, Donnie, was what was the date of that original episode? Do you know what it was? Or at least the year?
I could find it out. It was definitely like 2015, I believe.
Wow.
Because some of our first episodes, we would talk about like our hype for the new Star Wars movie. that was before episode 7.
There you go.
So yeah, it was like 2015, I think.
I just like how everything in Donnie's life in terms of like time reference is before or after certain Star Wars movies.
That's true. It's a nice little like milestone. So gentlemen, my question.
It was August 28th. 2015.
August 28th. All right. So
wow,
only a month after my birthday.
I was but a wee lad.
That's right. So, I asked the audience to share their favorite moments of the show. I'll ask you guys favorite moments of the show. John, do you have any off the top of your head? Maybe a particular guest that we interviewed or a subject matter that we covered?
I really still like that episode that we talked about the beer labels in Michigan.
Right.
So when they were trying to ban Founder's Breakfast Stout because the label had a baby drinking from a bowl of, I guess, beer.
Oatmeal.
Yeah, it was oatmeal. So it was an oatmeal stout. And they were trying to like ban these because they thought it was going to encourage other kids to drink this beer. And then Donnie created this very sweet intro music.
I could probably find that.
I still think that still sticks with me was that like just ridiculous nanny state sort of issue, and then our conversation about it.
Yeah, John's famous line, "Oh, I'm in the liquor store. Better find some baby food. Better buy some baby food."
And then I actually brought some of the beer in for Donnie to try, and he doesn't really like beer, but it was fun.
It was
So that's most memorable.
Yeah,
I don't really have. And then any time that Jim was not on the podcast is pretty memorable.
I'm just gonna keep showing Jim's comment that he is listening every time that somebody makes a negative comment about him. Justin, Isaac, either of you have a particular favorite moment?
I don't know if I have a particular favorite moment. They all just kind of blend together as one big experience that I only kind of sort of enjoy. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I personally was pretty fond of the apology video that I did for Isaac.
Oh yeah,
I really enjoyed that. That was fun. I actually think that some of the I think that some of the weird like off-brand stuff that we've done at times has been kind of cool. I think that some of the UFO things was actually pretty interesting. There was some really interesting stuff that you guys.
Thank you, Justin.
I mean, and I used to. I mean, I'm a think tank nerd. I actually liked some of the earlier stuff when we did a little more,
certificate of
rank
need
lists
laws.
And no, I hated con law stuff. That was John's thing. But I did like the rank list type stuff, comparing the states, why some states are more successful than others. I think a lot of that stuff was really interesting. So, I mean...
Yeah, I mean, we could... There's nothing stopping us from filtering some of that stuff in. It just... After a while, it seemed like we were getting a little repetitive on that.
Yeah, we were.
Isaac Orr, you have a favorite moment? I have a favorite joke of yours.
Oh, boy.
I don't want to steal your thunder if you're going to... Pun intended.
I'll let you serve that one up. Justin's apology video was definitely one of my favorites. It was great having Michael Shellenberger on the show. That one was really cool. That one got enough people watching it for Donnie to cut his hair, but he welched on his bet.
Incorrect.
But I also, for some reason, the South Dakota versus Wayfarer episode sticks in my brain as like the quintessential In the Tank episode, like prior to John leaving.
It's just so in the weeds. And...
It's just like, what does this even mean? Like, part of me wants to do just like a follow-up discussion today to see if like anything has changed. Because that was like, what, 2017?
Do you remember that, John?
Vaguely.
Vaguely? You don't remember that? I remember it very well. That was like one of the more heated moments of the John era.
Was that when Donnie proclaimed himself as a socialist?
I forgot that was a running joke on the show.
No.
Like every week, John would call Donnie a socialist.
For one reason or another. Yeah, remember like the fight we got in over traffic tickets and whether or not they should be weighted towards your income? That one went on for weeks. John wouldn't talk to me in the office even after that one. That was
well, you're still wrong.
Were you arguing they should be?
So my favorite joke of Isaac.
Yes, Donnie was.
That is socialism.
My favorite joke of Isaac's was when we were talking about the new hockey team that was going to be going to Seattle. And I forget exactly what they were going to name their like stadium.
Climate Pledge Arena.
Climate Pledge Arena. To which Isaac said that a better name for the arena should be the Greta Thunderdome. That to me was probably the best joke served up on this podcast.
It didn't come to fruition.
Yeah, period. All right, great. Well, John, I know that you actually, quote, work for a living. So, we can let you go. But if you got any final words, feel free to share them.
No, just appreciate you carrying on the legacy, Donnie. And I do listen in every once in a while if there's a good guest or a good just something that's of interest. So keep up the good work. Or if Jim's not on. That's usually what I look for. I turn on the stream. If Jim's there, I turn it off. If he's not, then I listen. So that's just one man's opinion. I don't know, but appreciate. Yeah, we know, Jim, you're listening. But no, it's been good. Like I said, it was fun getting it off the ground. Glad it's continued, and you guys have really taken it to the next level. So Appreciate it, and hopefully
we've taken
we'll
it
all,
somewhere.
Yeah, we've
somewhere.
taken it somewhere.
Yeah,
John's
to
so
the moon.
classy.
So, like literally, when you're talking about UFOs. So go
John's
figure.
so
But
classy. He's so classy.
Yeah, that's so class. He wrote that
Yeah.
out. That was
did.
paired speech right there.
Justin, who's the sponsor today?
All right. Well, John, we're gonna let you go. Have fun
John.
hawking that
John's
Windex.
actually the sponsor. I
Yeah,
think.
Windex is the sponsor of today's episode.
Yeah.
Clean
this
those
appearance
windows.
by this appearance of Justin Haskins brought to you by Windex. Clean windows every single time. Windex.
All right. All
Clean
right.
windows are the windows to the soul.
All right, people. This is we're gonna start getting complaints that we're 15 minutes in and you haven't talked about anything policy, so we should probably get to it. Even though this is the 300th episode, it should be more of a celebration than actually a deep dive into policy. But whatever. We got to keep the people happy. Am I right?
That's right.
So,
Yes.
Isaac Orr, we've had you on because your expertise is in energy policy,
That is
and
correct.
following you on Twitter, which you are basically the only reason why I look on Twitter. You're a great follow at the fracking guy. John just chimed in. Do you ever talk about policy? I found,
Not
because of
anymore.
you, several articles about solar power that I thought would make up a really good segment for the 300th episode. Basically, we can group this all under why solar energy is terrible. So the first article that I have here is authored by Michael Shellenberger, which you actually just brought up. And it is titled, Why Everything They Said About Solar Was Wrong. So in this wonderful article, he talks about the problem of solar waste for the most part. There's a couple other topics that he touches on. We've talked about this issue a number of times in the podcast. Solar panels, they only last 20 to 30 years. Once their lives are over, they essentially become toxic wastes. This is because of the heavy metals that are infused in the glass panels, whether it's lead, cadmium, etc., etc. Shellenberger discusses his work on this issue 3 years ago and how it was met with skepticism from pro-solar crowd. But when reporters eventually looked into the issue, writes Shellenberger, they came to the same conclusion I had. This included the New York Times and Discover magazine. Discover magazine wrote, for instance, quote, "It is often cheaper to discard solar panels in landfills or send them to developing countries, as solar panels sit in dumps. The toxic material they contain can leach out into the environment and possibly pose public health hazard if they get into the groundwater supply." So, Isaac, my first question to you, sir, is do you think that these arguments that we've presented, these kind of, I guess, anti-solar arguments from an environmental perspective, do you think that that's ever going to resonate with your average environmentally conscious person? Are they ever going to come to the realization that solar is not nearly as green as they're being led to believe?
I think they will, but it's going to take a while because they're going to need to see it, because, the ability to foresee things is not really strong in a lot of folks. And so it's basically going to have to boil down to oh no, we've created this big mess. We need to clean it up. That's just kind of just how life goes.
So until it actually becomes a crisis, you're not going to be able to convince somebody that this is a problem.
Yeah, I think it's going to have to at least present some sort of real world consequences before people start to understand that, oh, okay, well, maybe there are negative trade-offs with all forms of energy. We need to try to minimize those impacts on the environment to the extent possible. So solar is going to fall into that same thing. Right now, people still like to pretend that wind and solar are consequence-free energy in terms of the environment is concerned, because there's a lot of, frankly, very persuasive propaganda saying that. So, eventually, I think we're all going to come to the conclusion that nuclear power produces the least amount of waste per unit of energy output. And we'll look back on this and we'll be like, wow, we can't believe that we did that. But I'm reading Matt Ridley's book, How Innovation Works. And apparently France banned the potato at one point in time because they thought it was evil and that it would cause leprosy. So
the potato?
Yeah, the potato. So there was a
John, you better watch out in Idaho.
Yeah. Oh, you disclosed it
already.
You disclosed his location.
Right. Sure. Wasn't supposed to do that.
In an undisclosed bunker in the 11th freest state.
All right. Sorry. Continue.
Yeah. So there was apparently something like a school of thought that said, oh, well, if you eat something that looks like a body part, it will help that body part. So like walnuts were used to improve brain function because they kind of look like a brain. And then somebody was like, oh, well, potatoes kind of look like fingers with leprosy. So like, oh, don't eat potatoes, they'll cause leprosy. And it was like a new product, right? Because it was from the Andes. So it was like a new world crop that got taken back to the old world. And France maintained its ban on potatoes until a huge famine hit the country. And one of the reasons that other countries were okay was because they ate potatoes. And it was way easier for invading armies to trample like wheat crops. So we're basically in the France banning the potato phase of energy for nuclear power.
Quite an analogy, man.
Eventually we'll figure it out, but it's going to have to get real bad before we like just pull our heads out of the sand and do what we should have done years ago.
Justin, same question to you, because when we were kind of like strategizing on what our messaging should be about like the Green New Deal, we thought we came to the conclusion that we should pursue like the Green New Deal is, I forgot our terms, economically disastrous and environmentally toxic. And we thought that that would be something that would resonate with the most people. So do you think that like, and surely, you know, obviously when we're preaching to the choir, that type of messaging works, but do you think that that goes across party lines? Do you think that environmentalists minded people would actually be susceptible to like an argument like that?
I think if it's from the right person. I think part of the problem is that, you know, we live in a world now where, you know, it doesn't matter what your studies say. It doesn't matter what statistics you use. It doesn't matter how good your evidence is. To a lot of people, if you are on the other side, they're not going to listen to anything you have to say. They're just going to assume you're lying somehow. And so, you know, when you and I talk about it, there's a certain segment of society that will listen to us. There's a certain segment of society that will consider it, who don't necessarily agree with us about everything. But there are a lot of people who will just literally never believe anything that I say because I work for the Heartland Institute. You know, like that's just the reality of the situation. And so the only way to reach those people is to have people who are not on our side of the aisle on everything else talk about this.
Like Michael Moore.
Like Michael Moore. And that was what made that so important, that movie that he did with Jeff Gibbs. So he was the producer of it. Jeff Gibbs was the actual director of that movie.
Sure.
But that was so important because it was people on the left saying, we love the environment, we are worried about climate change, but this stuff is all garbage. Solar panels don't work. You know, all that they went through, wind farms, like all that stuff, it just doesn't work. So you need to have more of that. And in order to have more of that, you have to have some reason for the left to reverse course on this talking point that they've had for decades, basically. Yeah. And I don't know what will catalyze that, but something has to catalyze that in order for it to happen. And my guess would be it's got to be that they come up with some other sort of scheme which is more beneficial to them politically, and so they're going to go with that. Or the evidence and problems with solar panels are so bad and so in your face that they have to start moving away from it because they don't want to be associated with it anymore. The problem with that second scenario is that I don't think we're ever going to get there, because I don't think we're ever going to actually depend on solar panels, because I think it's so bad that the people who are actually in charge, that actually have to sign off on this stuff, will find a way to make it look like we're using solar panels, when in reality it's just a tiny fraction of energy, and we're not ever really relying on it. It's basically just virtue signaling. I don't think we'll ever depend on it because it's that bad.
No, you're right. If we were like 90% dependent on it, then yeah, this problem would come to a head a lot quicker. But I've got a couple of articles that seem like we're already at a point where we have to do something about this. But before I get into the next kind of part of this article, I want to reach out to TM Willemse, who just sent me an email saying, send me the book. A, you need to send me your address as well. And B, that wasn't the deal. You have to say what your favorite part of the show has been over the last 300 episodes, sir. So once you send me that email, then I'll consider sending you the book. Until
then, you're fired.
Yeah. I'm doing a hard line on my contest here, folks. So to stave off the realization of the contradiction, many advocates aware of the growing problem point to the increased recycling as a solution to the problem. Some areas, like the European Union, are already mandating that solar panel producers collect and recycle their panels and factor this cost into the price of the panels. So Shellenberger addresses this, saying that a new major study of the economics of solar, published by the Harvard Business Review, finds that the waste produced by solar panels will make electricity from solar panels 4 times more expensive than the world's leading energy analysts thought. The economics of solar, write several names I won't try to pronounce, of the Institut Européen d'Administration des Affaires, one of Europe's leading business schools, say that that this will darken quickly as the industry sinks under the weight of its own trash. By 2035, write the economists, discarded panels will outweigh new units sold by 2.56 times. In turn, this will catapult the levelized cost of energy, a measure of the overall cost of the energy producing asset over its lifetime, to 4 times the current projection. So, Isaac, I mean, this is a lot of garbage. As we predicted years ago, that this is becoming more of an issue. And it started to appear, in more and more articles. But has this gotten onto the radars of policymakers at all here in the United States, whether it's on a state or, national level, where they're pushing for increased mandates of renewable energy?
The places where it has caught on are local governments. So you have county and township governments that are concerned about this because they're the ones who are ultimately going to be stuck cleaning it up. I get a few emails a week from people saying, hey, what kind of ordinances should we have in place in order to make sure that these things don't just get left where they're at, right? Because of the potential for them to break and, leach cadmium, lead, and other heavy metals into the ground. So, and this has also been this interest in local ordinances for like bonding for these projects has gone up since American Experiment released the Robert Bryce paper, Not in Our Backyard. So while it really hasn't gotten the state and federal attention that it deserves, because that's politically inconvenient, it will get fought at the county and township level where it ultimately maybe matters the most. So the state and federal people can ignore this for longer, so they will. But there's also the problems associated with slavery for solar panels, the fact that they use coal-fired power plants to produce these things. So it's basically like everything you've heard about solar panels is wrong, and that they kind of suck on every level.
Right. I think that's the point that we've been trying to drive home for the last couple of years on this podcast.
But there's so many different facets of why they suck that it's difficult to explain in a single, concise thought process of, they just suck all around.
Right. You know what? And that was actually going to be one of my favorite episodes that I was going to point to that we've done in the 300 episodes that we've done so far. Is the episode, I forget exactly what number it was, but it was basically like the top 5 reasons why wind and solar are terrible.
Yeah.
And I thought we went through and like hit it from at least 5 different facets of why these, are not good alternatives to the reliable energy sources that we use today. But about the European Union and their mandating of like the recycling and them basically requiring these companies to factor these costs into the price of their panels. Why isn't this some type of law or mandate that like Republicans are pursuing here in the United States?
I think there's a growing appetite for that, but they also don't want to be seen as anti-renewable. So I don't understand this. Like we should be running, or I say we, like conservatives, libertarians, free market people, which tend to have a large constituency of Republicans. We should be owning the other side with this. It's like, you think that climate change is an existential crisis, but you hate nuclear power, you hate hydropower. The only sources of electricity that you like are the ones that don't show up when we need it most. And then we have rolling blackouts. Like nothing in the other side's position on energy makes any freaking sense. And rather than trying to but there's this perception that like conservatives are just wrong on the environment when like the opposite could not be further from the truth. So when that could not be further from the truth, it's, you improve the environment by doing more with less, right? But the environmentalists want you to do less with less. They want you to consume less energy. They want you to be less impactful. But really what that does is decreases the efficiency in which you use resources, which has a higher impact on them. So I don't know if that was quite as clear as I was hoping it would be.
Well,
but
I mean, Justin, same question though. Like, why do you have any alternative point of view on why, you know, Republicans or conservatives aren't pursuing some type of like factor in all the costs? You know, these things can't just be thrown in landfills because of the toxic qualities of all of this. So you have to foot the bills, the producers of this stuff, to have it recycled. Like, why aren't they pushing for that? And they could push it from not like an anti-renewable perspective, like like Isaac was kind of warning about, but it could be from an environmentally conscious perspective, because this stuff can't just be thrown in landfills.
Well, I think there's a few issues. The first is I think a lot of politicians don't know anything.
Yep.
So there's that whole issue. I think the other thing is that, kind of going in line with what Isaac said, there's really two sorts of camps politically. Like, we're just talking about politically when it comes to opposition to you know, widespread solar and wind and stuff like that. There are the people who say, well, you know, we need to have this stuff, but we need to, you know, roll it out in a way that is better than what the left wants to do. And in addition to that, we need to have other kinds of more traditional energy backing it up. And it's kind of like a halfway position almost, right? Mm-hmm. There are those kinds of Republicans. A lot of them are in blue states and places where they feel like they have to make those overtures to people who really care a lot about the environment. And then there are people who are totally opposed to all of this, but then what they want to do oftentimes is just focus on how many jobs would be lost if we got rid of all the oil and gas stuff, and how bad it would be if we didn't have fracking. And they just want to talk about how the left wants to destroy all of those things. And they don't even care to talk about why solar and wind is bad. They don't need to. In their minds, they just say to themselves, we don't need this because there's no climate crisis, and you guys are just destroying all of these jobs. Look at all these people who'll be out of work, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think it's just, for them, they've decided that politically those are the best ways to attack the issue. I don't agree with it. I think that there is a really, really strong case to be made to say, if you care about the environment, then these options they shouldn't even be on the table. We shouldn't even be talking about them if you care about the environment. The debate over if you support solar, it should come from a position of someone who does not like the environment, but wants it for some other reason. That's the only logical way that you can actually support it. Either that or it's ignorance. There's no other way to support wind and solar. They don't make any sense economically. They're really not that great for the environment. In some cases, they're horrible for the environment. And when you scale it up, which is the other thing, I mean, we're just talking about wind and solar within the world we're living in now, or maybe slightly worse than what we have now in terms of the amount of it that we have. What about when we get to a world where 70% of it is the energy comes from wind and solar? What does that world look like? Can you imagine the landfills in that world? I mean, yeah. It would get so out of control. It's not even realistic. Like, it can't happen because it's funny. So bad.
I was thinking about like the movie WALL-E, and you know how it's like a giant landfill. It's like, if that was accurate, it would just be like chock full of solar panels and like wind turbines.
Pretty much.
Absolutely.
Pretty much.
And this is kind of, you know, the Harvard Business Review talks about how the International Renewable Energy Agency is vastly underestimating the amount of solar trash that we're going to have.
Right.
Because they're assuming that people are going to use solar panels for a full 30 years. Whereas Harvard Business Review found that people are probably going to be replacing these after about 10 to 15 years. So it'll be, I forget the exact figures, but it is substantially more trash as people replace the solar panels earlier, because they degrade much faster than people thought they would.
Yeah. So that study that you're talking about says, if replacements occur as predicted by our statistical model, that solar panel waste can produce 50 times more waste in just 4 years than the International Renewable Energy Agency anticipates. Alarming as they are, these stats may not do full justice to the crisis, as our analysis is restricted to residential installations.
Yes.
Commercial and industrial panels added to the picture, the scale of replacement could be much larger.
Right. It's not, and this is the point. When you hear numbers like that, if you actually take those things seriously, then it's not even like, we shouldn't even be having the conversation. It's that ludicrous. The idea that we would actually be relying on these things is completely absurd.
That's why I didn't even think it was worth talking about the Green New Deal.
I know.
Like, you guys were all excited, and I was like, you guys are idiots. Why are you talking about this? This will never go anywhere. And I was the idiot.
I mean, that's the funny thing is it's like what I think this really illustrates in a really profound way is this is just another example of how people are not really getting the full information from the media and from the people who are supposed to be telling them these sorts of things. Like, you would think that you could trust the media to talk about these issues in this way so that we could balance the costs and the benefits of these various kinds of energy. But they don't ever question the left when the left talks about plans for wind and solar as if they're realistic, when they're obviously not realistic, and it takes all of about 30 minutes of research to figure that out. I mean, it's not hard to figure out that those things are not realistic options, and yet the media will allow Bernie Sanders and AOC and Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren and all the rest to talk endlessly about these things, the whole town halls that are 15 hours long, where it's one Democrat candidate after another getting up there talking about this like it's realistic, when it's not. It's like they might as well just be up there talking about how they're gonna, mine the moon, because there's all this special energy inside the moon that we don't know about, and if we could just get to that energy, it would be moon energy, and everything would be so much better.
I'd be way more open to that.
I'm sure you would, and so I think it's like, it's that ludicrous, and yet why do people not recognize it? Why aren't politicians talking about it? Because at the end of the day, the people who should be pointing out how ludicrous those statements are not.
Well, they don't understand it either.
Yeah, they don't. They don't. But they don't want to. They don't want to.
No, they don't want to. But I don't know if they. It's probably because they don't want to, but they clearly don't understand it, right? So, and that's why everybody gets this like super uncritical pass on battery storage, right? Like, the media is just like, oh, battery storage is growing rapidly. And it's like growing rapidly from here to here, right? Yeah. So just like a tiny increment, but like, wow, year over year growth. We can't believe it. And it's just like, well, it's still not very much.
Well, we've got a couple of comments here. One from this gentleman says, or lady, I don't know, says the moon is made of cheese anyways. So what you're saying is a good source for natural gas. Maybe. Swing and a miss. Okay.
That's horrible.
We also have happy 300th episode as the founding member and president of the Isaac Orr fan club Illinois chapter. My favorite show memory is when Justin gave a heartfelt apology to Isaac. #unfollow Justin. #Justin trash bins. We'll just leave it at that.
Man.
So I also
that just made my day.
Very good. I also have an update
to make his day.
I also have an update from our TM Willemsu, who says that his favorite moments are gym rants because they're ammunition for arguing with others and damned entertaining. So great. You fulfilled the requirements for the contest, and I will send you a book sometime next week.
Okay, Jim's burner accounts are no longer allowed to qualify for prizes.
Yeah.
We
should have made that clear when you were laying it out.
Good point.
That's on us, though.
We'll let this one slide. The next person, it's got to be anything outside of Jim. All right. So a couple of other things just on that point of just like the trash and all of that. It talks more about just like the cost of actually recycling these solar panels and how there is some valuable material in there, whether it's silver, but the extraction process during the recycling is nowhere close to worth it. It costs 10 to 30 times the price of just dumping it in a landfill. And then that study says the totality of these unforeseen costs could crush the industry's competitiveness. So again, if we were to pursue some mandate that says that you have to factor in these costs of recycling it, it could completely undermine this whole industry. So something to think about. There is an article that I also have. Everything we talk about will be in the show notes. This is from The Conversation. It is it is titled, "Stop Removing Your Solar Panels Early, Please. It's Creating a Huge Waste Problem for Australia." The author talks about the government subsidies for wind and solar and how they're incentivizing people and businesses to replace their panels far earlier than they should. Researchers predict Australia will accumulate 1 million tons of solar panel waste by 2047, the same weight as 19 Sydney Harbour bridges, to put it in context that no one outside of Australia would know.
Crikey!
But this number is likely to be higher, as we found people often choose to remove panels after just 10 to 12 years of use. This is much earlier than their estimated end of life age of 30 years. Australians have heeded the call to increase renewable energy. The installed capacity of panels across Australia has increased dramatically, from 25 megawatts in 2007 to 77,000 megawatts in 2017. Likewise, the rooftop solar market capacity has almost doubled between 2014 and 2018. Australia has committed to the UN Sustainable Development Goal of using fewer resources. And this requires us to use products like solar panels efficiently with less waste. But Australia's 2020 progress update shows our per capita material footprint is increasing. In fact, it's one of the highest in the world at 70% above the OECD average. So again, to Justin's point that, this might only become a problem once we have a wider scale usage of solar panels, it seems like that is not the case in at least Australia and places like California, as this article goes on to mention, where they're seeing these solar panels stack up. A lot of garbage.
But yeah, when you look at California, are the solar panels worse than all the other problems that they have there right now?
Like the literal poop on the ground.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of reasons why people dump their solar panels that I think are pretty interesting. There's 4 main reasons that are pointed out in this article. One, if a panel or two is damaged, consumers often have the entire array replaced so that the replacement panels wouldn't be mismatched with the old ones. And that's not necessarily because of an aesthetic reasons, although I'm sure that's factors into some people's decision making, but because the potential differences in the electrical properties or something like that. I'm no solar panel engineer, so I don't know the specifics. Also because of the allure of new tech. Why deal with an iPhone X when the iPhone 11 is so much better, right? So once some new solar panel technology comes out, people want the latest and greatest, so they'll dump their 5-year-old panels sometimes. Government rebates don't cover replacing single panels, but they do apply to replacing the entire array. So again, if there's some type of hail damage to one particular panel, a government might foot the bill for replacing the entire thing. So they might be dumping, totally fine solar panels right in the garbage because you want a brand new one. And while solar panels are supposed to last 30 years, again, this gets into some technical stuff. Maybe Isaac can shine a light on it. But the solar inverters required only last 10 to 12 years. So when you need new ones of those, hey, you might as well replace everything. So those are some of the reasons why people likely won't hold on to their solar panels for the full 30-year lifespan of these things.
Well, there's also another reason, which is actually maybe the driving factor behind all of it, which is related to all the things that you just said to some extent. And that is that the people who are trying to sell you solar panels don't want you to wait 30 years to replace them.
It's a very good point.
They want you to buy solar panels all the time. If they had it their way, you'd replace it every year.
Yeah.
They don't care what happens to the solar panels after they end up in a landfill. It doesn't matter to them. They're trying to sell you solar panels the same way that people sell you cars before you really... Think about cars. I think cars are actually a good example, right? A lot of cars can theoretically last 15 years, or maybe more. It's possible for a car to last that long. You can keep fixing it up. But does anybody do that? I mean, other than Donald? Some people do, but
I'm driving it until the wheels fall off.
I know you will, but there are but most people don't. Most people replace their cars every 5 to 10 years. And they do it because of all the reasons why they might replace their solar panels and all the reasons why they might. And there's all these car companies out there constantly pitching this idea to them that they should be buying new cars. It's the same thing with these solar panels. And the government has, because they want to be able to offer people something, and they have an incentive to have more subsidies, to have more rebate, all these things that help incentivize people to get solar panels, replace their solar panels, etc. So when you look at all this stuff, you add it all together, there's all of these forces who are pushing people not to hold on for 30 years to get rid of this. So theoretically, could you do that? Yeah, theoretically, you can keep your car for probably 25, 30 years if you just keep replacing everything in it over and over and over again. No one does that.
It's a very good point. But maybe people aren't retiring them prematurely, like everyone else on here is suggesting, or all these articles are suggesting. Perhaps the lifespan of solar tech is actually much shorter than we're being led to believe. And that is a point that you can find in this other article that I found because of Isaac's Twitter account, which is from PV Tech, and it's titled "Built Solar Assets Are Chronically Underperforming and Modules Degrading Faster Than Expected, Research Finds." Turns out the degradation of the solar panel is likely twice as bad as previously thought. The prevailing estimates were that solar modules would degrade at 0.5% annually, while a new report from the Kilowatt Hours Analytics titled Solar Risk Assessment finds that the degradation rate is around 1% annually. This means that solar modules are likely to underperform production estimates by 14% over 20 years of the module's life. The article goes on to say that to save the industry's credibility, the performance predictions need to be recalibrated to factor in this reality.
Well, that's all true. But going back to what you were saying before about, maybe the lifespan's really 12 years. That's actually a really interesting point, because what does it mean what does the lifespan mean? Like, what does that even mean? I mean, does it mean how long it will last under absolutely ideal conditions?
Yeah,
or does it mean how much in reality things actually last for people when they buy it?
That was actually going to be my question to Isaac. So like these they talk about it observed, like in the field, like these are the numbers that they observed compared to what like the official estimates were. Is that the difference between like a laboratory setting versus the actual practical usage of these things, whether they're sitting on a rooftop or like gathering dust in some field somewhere? Is that the difference here, Isaac? Or is it just that, the initial estimates were just way too rosy to begin with?
Yeah, it is the difference between the actual observed life and what the, potentially overly rosy estimates were. So I think a lot of solar panels have a 25-year warranty, but I'm not exactly sure how many do. But we see this with the wind turbines all the time. The international, or some people say, oh, the wind turbine, that'll last 30, 35 years. And then we see some like replaced or repowered, which is basically retooled after 11. So like it's all based on unrealistic assumptions for how long these damn things are going to last. And now we're seeing the same thing with the solar industry. So, if you build a nuclear power plant, it will generate electricity around the clock, regardless of the weather, for 80 years. Yeah. And it's just stupid that we're wasting all this money on disposable power plants.
It's funny. It's funny that you mentioned the nuclear thing. There was a report that came out not that long ago, within the last couple of years or so, that said that they were increasing all of their estimates for lifespans for nuclear power in the U.S. They were saying these things are actually going to last longer than what we initially thought.
Yep.
By a lot. And it was like 80 years ended up being where it settled. And I think initially it was maybe like 60 years or something like that.
Yeah, every nuclear power plant is initially licensed for 40 years by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but you can apply to get it relicensed and have that license extended for 20-year increments.
So 80 years. I mean, just think about that. 80 years. The other thing about the solar panels is that, in a lot of parts of the country, because these things can be damaged by natural, by a tree falling down, by hail. Right. Now, if you live in a place like Illinois or Wisconsin or Minnesota or New England or Idaho, a lot of these places, when you buy solar panels, if you're banking on it lasting 30 years, what you're really saying is that within the next 20 years, I'm not going to have a really bad hailstorm. Not one, like it's not going to happen for 20 years. Or I'm not going to have a tree fall that I know it's not going to happen. No way that a trees fall down in over 20 years. I mean, in places that have really extreme weather, which is a very large percentage of the country, you can't. You don't go 30 years without having some really horrible thing happen. I mean, even in places like Florida, a lot of Florida, they're getting hurricanes, huge hurricanes and storms and stuff that could damage these things over the course of 15, 20 years. So the idea that they would last 30 years, something so fragile, something that has effectively been proven based on the real world data, that it doesn't last 30 years. The idea that we would continue buying into that, again, just goes right back to what I was saying before about the media. The media, if they spent even 5 minutes thinking about any of this stuff, just logically, they don't even need to read.
They would only need to spend, 5 to 10 minutes of thinking, why might this not work?
Right. Exactly.
Like that's all it would take.
Exactly. Does anyone really think that this fragile thing that I'm putting on my roof in places with extreme weather is going to last 30 years? Does that make any sense? And the answer, of course, is no. And then if they just called someone up on the phone who works in the solar industry and asked them, how often do you see these things replaced, that last for that long in your experience? Are you replacing them or not? They would say, yeah, we replace them, every 10 years or so for a lot of people.
The solar industry would not admit that.
They might.
They wouldn't. They would say, get up on the phone, some of these things last for 30 years.
That's probably
Isaac,
true.
I want to touch on one more topic here, but there's a couple of comments that I think maybe you can shine a light on here. So this gentleman says, interesting, a patient who runs an oil drilling company just received 3 new well approved on federal land. Could it be that the frack ban was just a smokescreen? In replying to that was another commenter who said the original ban on fracking was just a 90-day ban. Not sure if they extended the ban or not, but we are past 90 days, so maybe fracking is allowed now. Do you have any insight into that?
I believe a federal judge out of Louisiana stopped the fracking ban, so I think that's why it's going forward. But you need to double check that, but I'm pretty sure.
I think Isaac's right. And they will pursue a fracking ban going forward. I mean,
for sure.
Yeah, it's just got to work its way through the courts.
All right, I got one more topic here. We've only got like 8 minutes. So this was a story that has been kind of circulating recently of the idea of these big investment firms going around the country and scooping up houses and then renting them out to people. And I don't know.
I love this story.
I don't know what's normal and what's abnormal when it comes to investment firms buying up real estate. So I really didn't think too much of it. Eventually, I did look into it, and it was the results of my Google search that actually raised my concern level. I was immediately hit with several headlines from Slate, The Atlantic, The American Prospect, Vox, and others saying basically nothing to see here. Nothing to see here. And lefty outlets kind of going up to bat for like massive investment firms always kind of raises my antenna a little bit. So I started looking into it. And so the article that I have here to prove that I'm not super biased is Slate. And it is titled, Investment Firms Aren't Buying All the Houses, but they are buying most of the important ones. So the article starts off seemingly trying to downplay this narrative, saying the investment firms' purchases are not responsible for driving up housing prices, and that the purchases only make up a mere 15% of sales in the country. 15% of sales seems like a pretty big number to me.
Yeah, mere. I like that.
But what do I know? Firms like BlackRock are, in some cases, buying entire neighborhoods worth of single-family homes. To Slate's credit, by paragraph 8 of the article, it does start talking about how BlackRock and Blackstone are specifically targeting growing areas, buying over a fifth of the houses on sale in places like Atlanta, Charlotte, and Phoenix. Also, these companies are able to borrow money at a far cheaper rate than your average home buyer, so they can afford to buy houses at a price substantially higher than like the sticker price. Slate's solution to this problem is the same solution they have for pretty much every problem they perceive, which is tax the rich more. Then they take a couple of jabs at landlords and call it a day. So that's their perspective on this.
Ugh, disgusting land phobia.
Right, landphobics. But the article that I came across that really piqued my interest was an op-ed in Bloomberg titled "America Should Become a Nation of Renters." So it says, the article starts off saying rising real estate prices are stoking fears that home ownership, long considered a core component of the American dream, is slipping out of reach for low and moderate income Americans. That may be so, but a nation of renters is not something to fear. In fact, it's the opposite. So despite, like the headline, the kind of clickbaity headline, the article isn't quite as crazy as the headline suggests. It mostly talks about how home ownership, from an investment perspective, it talks about how changes in the market have made real estate more of a liquid asset. This allows for people to be more mobile, less nailed down, freeing up land for development, etc., etc. However, it does end with this passage. The U.S. is not quite there, a nation of renters. And not just because of too many people are chasing too few apartments. To see the U.S. as a nation of renters requires a revision of the American dream of home ownership. This country was always more about new frontiers and comfortable settlements anyways. So it seems like there's a couple things going on. A, there are major investment companies going around scooping up massive amounts of houses and in turn renting them. And this starting this narrative that's like, it's fine. People don't need houses anyways. Justin, when we've talked about this in the past, you've talked about the importance of home ownership. So do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, there's a movement amongst many people who are, sort of in the elite class, the BlackRocks of the world, bankers, some of the folks at the World Economic Forum, Great Reset type people who truly do believe that the world is going to be better off when we inevitably, because they don't even see this as something that we should choose to do. They see this as inevitable. When we inevitably move as a society towards this environment where people don't really own things, they just rent everything, whether it's their house, their car, basically all possessions. You essentially own almost nothing. And they look at the Uber model, right? And they say, well, look at Uber, right? In the city, there are people who don't own a car. They just use Uber. Whenever they need a car, they use Uber or they use Lyft or something like that. Well, why can't we just do that with everything? Renting is on the rise. There's more people renting apartments now than ever before. Why do we ever really need to own anything? And the biggest, to some extent, renting things can be a really valuable thing, right? If you don't have the money to own your own home or the credit to own your own home, or you don't have the money to buy a car, or you don't have a place to store your car because where you live in the city, there's no place for it. It's too expensive to do or whatever. Renting makes sense. But the downsides to all of that is that if you are not purchasing items that store value, in particular housing, then you are not accumulating wealth. The vast majority of people accumulate wealth through their home as their primary form of wealth accumulation over their lifetime. And the way that they're able to retire is that they build up all this wealth in a home and then they sell it when they get older and they move into a smaller home and they've got all this extra money sitting on the side. That's the primary way that people store wealth in this country, especially who are in the middle class and the working class. That's how they store wealth. So if you have a world where everyone's just renting, there is no more buying, then how do you store wealth? How does anyone become wealthy? And then how do you rent to people?
You buy assets and you rent them to other people,
but
they provide the wealth that you then enjoy later.
But under this model, you're not going to be able to. That's the whole point. It's all going to be owned by corporations.
I'm already in.
Isaac, you're in, so you're fine.
Yeah, as a fellow person of land,
yes, thank you.
I will give you the last word on this, Isaac, because we only have a minute. But to Justin's point about the World Economic Forum and some other people like advocating this type of stuff, I want to point to that one article that we've talked about before on this podcast, which is titled "Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better." And it basically talks about this world, like Justin was talking about, where everything is Uberized. You don't own anything. You only ever just pay for services or rent, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason why I'm bringing up this article is it's a very interesting, just like trying to see from these people's perspective of what their vision of the future is. But two, if you look it up, it is actually a very hard article to find. It seems like they're trying to scrub it. Like this didn't pass the smell test for your average person.
And by the way, it's written by a member of parliament for the country of Denmark. So it's not like some like blogger or something. Like it's an actual like politician who wrote this article.
If you go to the show notes, I have found this on archive.org. I used the Wayback Machine to find this. So if you're interested, I have the link to it right there, because the internet, nothing truly goes away forever. Isaac Orr, last word on this topic before we shut it down.
Rent is due.
Okay. That's fantastic. All right, yeah, but it's an interesting story. We
should revisit that topic when we have more time.
Yeah, I mean, it talks about just one last thing that kind of just show the trend. It said in a specific year, I think maybe the early 2000s, that like home ownership was at like 69% or something.
Nice.
And then it dropped down to like 62% during like the Obama years, before kind of going up again under the Trump years to like 66%. So it's definitely downward trending, as the article points out. So it's an interesting topic, and we'll definitely keep an eye on it. Gentlemen, I think that's going to do it for this episode of In the Tank, episode 300, everybody. As always, you can follow us on... No, you don't follow us on Twitter. But subscribe to us, write a review on iTunes. It'd be greatly appreciated. You can find us on YouTube live if you're viewing it. The people that are just getting audio only, they have to wait till Fridays. So if you want to contribute to it on a live basis, you can send us your comments during the show. It's really cool. So watch us on Thursdays if you want to, on YouTube and Facebook. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook, Socialist Twitter, and Parler when it's working.
And Parler when it's working. Isaac Orr? Same
at the Fracking Guy on Twitter and at AmericanExperiment.org.
Fantastic. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you next week.